Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever caught yourself saying, hey, I know my own mind? We all kind of walk around with this deep-seated assumption that we have total authority over our own thoughts, our beliefs, and our logic. But what if the person you actually know the least is you? Today, we're taking a super fascinating journey straight into the architecture of your brain. We're going to test your most deeply held beliefs, expose some pretty wild hidden logical blind spots, and ultimately rebuild the way you think. All right, let's just dive right into this with a pretty blunt but honestly highly accurate thought. Clint Eastwood once memorably said, "Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one." I mean, it's funny, right? Because it's true. We all have incredibly strong opinions. But just because we have an opinion or a really deeply felt belief absolutely does not mean it's well considered, perfectly logical, or, free of massive, glaring contradictions. In fact, if we're being honest, most of our opinions are a lot flabbier than we'd like to admit. And that brings us to this concept championed by the famous philosopher René Descartes. It's often called the incorrigibility of the mental. Basically, Descartes argued that we literally cannot be mistaken about the contents of our own minds. Like, if I think I feel something, I feel it. Simple, right? Well, modern psychology and philosophy have totally dismantled this idea. The reality? We are often tragically, painfully wrong about what's actually going on in our heads. We think we believe in socialism right up until we see our tax bill. We think we're being completely honest when actually we're just deceiving ourselves. So we're about to prove just how tangled our internal wiring really is. Section 1. Belief tensions. Let's put your brain through a quick philosophical obstacle course to see if your deeply held moral beliefs actually hang together. So let me ask you a direct question. Do you consider yourself an environmentalist who also, loves convenience? I think most of us would probably nod along to that. We recycle, we genuinely care about the planet, but man, we also love the sheer ease of modern life. It seems like a perfectly normal way to live. But actually, I'm setting a bit of a trap for you here, because I want to reveal what philosophers call cognitive dissonance. You see, there's a hidden tension between two very common beliefs. On one side, we have this statement: the environment should not be damaged unnecessarily in the pursuit of human ends. Sounds incredibly reasonable, right? But on the other side, we have people shouldn't travel by car if they can walk, cycle, or take a train instead. Okay, here's the tension. Walking or cycling is always going to be less damaging than driving, period. So if you choose to drive when you technically could walk, you are, by definition, causing unnecessary environmental harm. And yet so many of us agree completely with the first statement while totally dismissing the second just to justify our daily commute. Now, if you just felt a little twinge of discomfort there, don't worry, you are absolutely not alone. A staggering 50% of the 80,000 people who took this philosophical health check online held this exact contradictory tension. It's crazy. We basically balance these opposing beliefs through some intense intellectual gymnastics. We often redefine the word necessary to just mean, well, convenient for me. It really just goes to show how easily our minds can hold two completely conflicting truths without even breaking a sweat. Moving on to Section 2. Logic blind spots. We're going to give you a puzzle now that most of humanity spectacularly fails. Imagine two sets of cards based on the famous Peter Wasson selection task. For the first set, we've got an abstract puzzle. The rule is, if a card has a vowel on one side, it has an even number on the other. Which cards must you turn over to prove the rule is broken? Now, for the second set, imagine a super familiar social scenario. You own a bar. The rule is, if a person drinks beer, they must be over 21. Which cards must you turn over to catch rule breakers? Take just a second to really think about your answers. All right, ready for the results? Get this. Only 16% of people get the abstract card task right. The correct answer is you absolutely must turn over the E to ensure there's an even number on the back. And here's the kicker, you must turn over the 7 to ensure there is not a vowel on the other side. Almost everyone picks E, sure, but they usually totally fail to realize they need to check the 7. Instead, they incorrectly want to check the 4, even though the rule says absolutely nothing about what has to be on the back of an even number. But contrast that massive, sweeping failure with this number. 76% of people easily solve the drinking puzzle. You instinctively know to check what the 19-year-old is drinking, right? And you immediately check the age of the person drinking the beer. But here is the wild part. It's the exact same underlying logic. The two puzzles are structurally identical. So why in the world does our brain completely fail the abstract test but completely ace the bar test? Well, this brilliantly illustrates the evolutionary theory of logic, which was proposed by psychologists Leda Cosmides and John Tooby. First off, human minds just didn't evolve to do abstract textbook logic. That wasn't really useful on the savannah. Second, we evolved to survive in groups, and that means we are hardwired, literally built, to detect social rule violations. Specifically, we are looking for cheaters. So third, when a logic puzzle is framed as a cheating scenario, like underage drinking, it triggers this massive pop-out effect in our brains. The answer just becomes instinctively obvious. We aren't really logical calculators, we're essentially highly evolved cheater detectors. Section 3. Validity versus truth. Welcome to the Syllogymnasium, where it's time to work out our formal logic muscles. Okay, let's dive straight into this definition. This was actually formulated by Aristotle himself. Validity. An argument is valid if and only if the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. Now, I really want you to burn this into your mind. Validity has absolutely nothing to do with real-world truth. Nothing. It is purely about the structural integrity of the argument. It just asks, if the premises were true, does the conclusion have to be true? Let me show you exactly what I mean here. Just listen to this argument. All cheese is from the moon, chocolate is a cheese, therefore chocolate is from the moon. Okay, obviously every single statement in that argument is entirely false. Cheese isn't from the moon and chocolate definitely isn't cheese. But from a purely logical standpoint, this argument is perfectly valid. If the first two statements actually were true, the conclusion would absolutely 100% have to be true. And you know, this is exactly how politicians and advertisers trick us every single day. They feed us arguments that feel valid structurally, but are actually built on entirely false premises. Now, consider the exact reverse problem. Arguments that are built on true statements, but are completely invalid. Take an absurd concept like an elephant-cow hybrid. Here's the argument. All cows are four-legged. Some four-legged animals are elephants. Therefore, some cows are elephants. The first two statements, undeniably true, but the conclusion is just completely absurd. This is what we call the sum/all confusion fallacy. Just because two groups share a characteristic, like having four legs, doesn't automatically mean they'd overlap with each other. And yet, our brains so often gloss right over these logical imprecisions in everyday conversation. Here is another classic trap. The argument goes like this. All politicians are liars. No person of integrity is a politician. Therefore, no person of integrity is a liar. This is known in logic as the illicit major fallacy. And we are incredibly vulnerable to this specific kind of mistake, mostly because of emotive language. We might inherently dislike politicians, and we obviously value integrity, so the conclusion just feels right in our gut. But structurally, it's completely invalid logic. Emotive language is basically a hack that tricks us into accepting terrible reasoning as objective truth. Section 4. Rebuilding thought. Let's talk about how we can use this newfound awareness of our blind spots to become sharper, way more intentional thinkers. So, we've learned that our moral beliefs are often full of contradictions, our brains are honestly pretty terrible at abstract logic, and we super easily confuse what is valid with what is true. So, where does that leave us? Well, the absolutely crucial point is this simple equation. Sound arguments equal true premises plus valid inferences. This right here is the ultimate goal of rational thought. A sound argument is the gold standard. It means you've put in the hard work of verifying that your facts, your premises, are actually true out there in the real world. And you've combined them using a perfectly valid logical structure. It basically requires stepping back and separating your emotions from your deductions. Which leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to chew on. Are we happy to just accept our logical failures? Or do we actually have a responsibility to think our opinions through more carefully? Look, it's so easy to just go with our gut, to let all that evolutionary hardwiring do the driving for us. But true understanding, and I'd argue true intellectual freedom, comes from actually taking responsibility for your own mind. So the next time you feel absolutely 100% certain about an opinion, maybe take a step back. Test your premises, check your logic. You might just be entirely surprised by what you really think. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.